The fishing trip that never ended. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning. Not in your bed, not in your home, not even on land, but surrounded by nothing but water. No phone signal, no engine, no direction, no rescue. Only endless ocean in every direction. Now imagine staying there for over a year. This is not a movie. This is not fiction. This actually happened. And it begins with a simple fishing trip that changed everything. November 17th, 2012. José Salvador Alvarenga was a fisherman working along the coast of Mexico. He was experienced, used to the sea, used to long days on water. For him, fishing was not a hobby. It was survival. That day, he prepared for what was supposed to be a routine trip. A small fishing boat. One crew member with him, a younger fisherman named Ezequiel Cordoba. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous, just another day at sea. They left the coast expecting to return within a short time. No one could have predicted that this trip would erase them from the world. At first, everything was normal. Calm waters, regular fishing, a quiet day. But the Pacific Ocean does not stay calm for long. Without warning, the weather began to shift. Clouds gathered. Wind picked up. The waves grew stronger. Soon, they were inside a violent storm. The sea was no longer water. It was chaos. Waves rose like moving walls. Rain struck in sheets. The boat was tossed in every direction. The engine struggled to stay alive. Visibility disappeared completely. For hours, they fought to stay afloat. But the ocean does not lose. Eventually, the engine failed. The boat went silent. No power, no control, only drifting. When the storm finally passed, something terrifying became clear. There was no land, no boats, no rescue teams, only water. Every direction looked the same. North, south, east, west. Nothing changed. They had drifted into one of the largest and emptiest places on Earth, the Pacific Ocean. At that moment, everything shifted. This was no longer a fishing trip. This was survival. And survival meant one thing. They were completely alone. At first, they believed rescue would come soon. They had sent distress signals before communication was lost. Someone must be looking for them. Someone must know where they are. But days passed. Then more days. No aircraft. No ships. Only silence. Slowly, a painful truth began to form. They were not waiting to be rescued. They were waiting to be found. And the ocean was too large for that to happen easily. Supplies began to matter. Water began to matter. Every hour became a calculation of survival. And still, they had no idea. They were just at the beginning of something that would last 438 days. What started as a normal fishing trip was now becoming one of the most unbelievable survival stories ever recorded. And the worst part? The storm was not the real danger. It was what came after. Days 1 to 120, the fight to stay alive. The first few days after the storm were the hardest. Not because they were starving, not because they were thirsty, but because they still had hope. And hope can be dangerous. Every morning, José Salvador Alvarenga and Ezequiel Cordoba scanned the horizon. Surely someone was looking for them. Surely a rescue plane would appear. Surely a fishing boat would spot them. They had managed to send distress calls before losing contact. People knew they were missing. People knew where they had been. Help had to be coming. At least, that's what they believed. But day after day, the horizon remained empty. No ships. No helicopters, no rescue teams, nothing. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. And with every sunrise, the terrible truth became harder to ignore. Nobody was coming. The search had failed, and now survival depended entirely on them. The problem was simple. Without food, a human can survive for weeks. Without water, only a few days. Their supplies were nearly gone. The little food they had brought was never meant to last. The boat carried no emergency survival equipment, no water purifier, no life raft, no backup communication system. Nothing. They were alone, completely alone. As thirst began to set in, panic followed. The human body starts sending powerful signals when it needs water. Your mouth dries. Your tongue swells. Your thoughts become slower. Concentration becomes difficult. Every hour feels longer than the last. Alvarenga knew that unless they found water soon, their ordeal would end quickly. Then nature gave them a chance. Rain. Dark clouds appeared overhead. Moments later, water began falling from the sky. For most people, rain is an inconvenience. For these two fishermen, it was life itself. They scrambled across the boat, collecting every drop they could. Plastic containers, buckets, anything that could hold water. They drank desperately. The rain saved them, but they had no way of knowing when it would return. Every storm became both a blessing and a threat. Storms brought precious drinking water. Storms also threatened to sink the boat. The men lived in constant uncertainty. One day they prayed for rain. The next day they prayed for it to stop. Soon another problem emerged. Food. The little supplies they had were disappearing, and hunger was becoming impossible to ignore. At first, they tried catching fish using whatever equipment remained on the boat. The ocean around them was filled with life. Fish swam beneath them. Birds occasionally landed nearby, but catching them was another challenge entirely. Every meal became a battle. Every fish represented another day alive. As time passed, necessity forced them to do things they never imagined. They began eating fish raw, fresh from the ocean. No fire, no cooking, no seasoning, just survival. The taste no longer mattered. Only calories mattered. Only staying alive mattered. Soon they became surprisingly skilled hunters. They learned how fish behaved, how birds moved, how to use scraps and bait, how to conserve energy. The ocean slowly transformed from an enemy into a source of food. But survival came at a cost. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The routine never changed. Wake up, search for rain, catch food, watch the horizon, sleep, repeat. Again, again. The endless repetition began affecting their minds. Humans are not designed for complete isolation. We need conversation, change, movement, purpose. Without those things, the mind starts searching for ways to cope. At first, the two men talked constantly. They discussed family, friends, their lives back home, their plans for the future, anything to distract themselves from the terrifying reality around them. But as weeks passed, those conversations grew darker. Questions appeared that neither man could answer. What if rescue never comes? What if we're drifting farther away every day? What if nobody even knows where we are anymore? The uncertainty became a prison. And then came another challenge. Birds. At first, seabirds seemed like a gift. Many landed directly on the boat. They could be caught and eaten. But hunting birds required crossing emotional boundaries. These weren't fish hidden beneath the water. These were living creatures staring directly at them. Still, survival demanded difficult choices. They caught birds, ate them raw, used every part they could. Nothing was wasted. The ocean had stripped away civilization. Only survival remained. By the second month, both men had become thinner. Their skin darkened from constant exposure to the sun. Salt covered everything. Their clothes deteriorated. Small wounds appeared across their bodies. The tropical sun was relentless. There was no shade, no shelter, no escape. Every day brought dehydration, exhaustion, and pain. Yet somehow they continued. Then disaster struck. One day, after catching a sea turtle, the men ate its meat. For Alvarenga, it wasn't a problem. For Cordoba, it became a nightmare. He became violently ill, weak, nauseated, unable to keep food down. His body began deteriorating rapidly. At sea, there are no hospitals, no doctors, no medicine. The smallest illness can become deadly. Alvarenga tried encouraging him, tried keeping his spirits alive. But Cordoba's condition continued worsening. As the days passed, he ate less and less. His strength disappeared. The younger fisherman began talking about death, about home, about his family, about how much he missed them. Alvarenga listened, but deep down, he knew something terrible was happening. The ocean wasn't just attacking their bodies anymore. It was attacking their minds. The isolation, the uncertainty, the endless blue horizon. Everything combined into a crushing psychological weight. For nearly 4 months, they had drifted without rescue. For months, most people struggle to imagine being stranded for 4 days. These men had endured for months. And the worst part? They had no idea they were still at the beginning of their journey. Because while they believed they had already survived the impossible, more than 300 days still remained. And soon, Alvarenga would face the most devastating moment of the entire ordeal. The moment he would find himself completely alone in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. A moment that nearly broke him forever. Days 120 to 240, the death of hope. By the 4th month at sea, something had changed. The ocean was still the same. Endless, silent, unforgiving. But the men were not the same anymore. José Salvador Alvarenga could feel it every time he looked at Ezequiel Cordoba. The younger fisherman was fading. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, in a way that was harder to stop. Like a light dimming 1 hour at a time. His body had become weak. Too weak to stand for long periods. Too weak to hunt properly. Too weak to fight the exhaustion that came with every passing day. The illness that began after eating turtle meat had not gone away. It had only gotten worse. And in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, far from any coastline, there was no help coming. No rescue helicopter. No passing ship that would stop in time. Just the two of them. In the ocean. Alvarenga later described this period as the hardest part of the entire journey. Not because of hunger, not because of thirst, but because he could see what was coming, and he could do nothing to stop it. Cordoba began sleeping more, talking less, staring at the horizon for long stretches of time. Sometimes he would whisper about home, about his family, about food he missed, about normal life, life on land, a life that now felt like it belonged to another world entirely. Alvarenga tried to encourage him. He told him to stay strong, to keep fighting. But survival at sea does not always respond to hope. Sometimes the body simply gives up. And when it does, the mind follows. Days passed in silence. The routine continued. Wake up, check the sky, collect rainwater when it came, catch fish when possible, eat, sleep, repeat. But now something had changed inside the boat. There was no longer equal partnership. One man was surviving. The other was disappearing. Then, one morning, Alvarenga realized Cordoba had not moved properly in hours. He was lying still, too still. The ocean wind moved across the boat, but he did not respond. Alvarenga called his name. Once, twice. No answer. What happened next has been described carefully in accounts of the ordeal. Cordoba had died. Alone. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean. No land in sight. No final goodbye. No rescue. Just silence. For Alvarenga, the moment was not just emotional. It was psychological destruction. Because now, he was completely alone. Truly alone. Before, there had been another voice. Another human presence. Even in suffering, there had been companionship. Now that was gone. And the ocean felt bigger than ever. The boat suddenly felt smaller. The nights became unbearable. Without conversation, time began to blur. Days no longer felt like days. They felt like repeating memories. The same water, the same silence. Alvarenga later admitted that this was the moment his mind began to fracture. He started talking to himself, then to the sky, then to Cordoba's body before it was released into the ocean. He would argue with imaginary voices. Sometimes he would laugh for no reason. Other times he would sit motionless for hours, unable to process reality. Sleep became irregular. Dreams and reality began mixing. He could no longer trust his own thoughts. The ocean was not just a physical prison anymore. It had become a mental one. At times, he considered giving up entirely, stopping the search for survival, letting the ocean take him the same way it had taken Cordoba. But something inside him refused. A small instinct. Not hope, not motivation, just biology. The refusal of the human body to accept death. So he continued, day after day, week after week, alone, drifting farther into the Pacific with every passing current, unaware that rescue was not close, but still hundreds of days away. And somewhere far behind him, on land, people had already stopped searching. Because as far as the world was concerned, José Salvador Alvarenga was already gone. Days 240 to 380, the point where time disappeared. After Cordoba's death, something fundamental broke inside the boat. Not the engine, not the structure, something inside Alvarenga himself. Silence was no longer just a condition. It became a presence, a heavy, living thing that sat beside him every hour of the day. He no longer measured time the same way. Days stopped having meaning. There was no calendar, no sunrise that felt different from the last, no real sense of today or tomorrow, only repetition. Wake, watch the ocean, eat if possible, drink rainwater if it came, sleep when exhaustion forced him to, and repeat, again, and again, and again. By this point, Alvarenga had drifted thousands of kilometers across the Pacific Ocean, carried only by currents he could not see or control. He was no longer near the coast of Mexico. He was being pulled deeper into open ocean, far from trade routes, far from fishing zones, far from rescue. The ocean that once felt like a workplace had now become an entire world, and he was the only human inside it. Food became unpredictable. Some days, birds landed on the boat. He learned to catch them with slow, careful movements, conserving energy as much as possible. Other days, there was nothing at all. No fish, no birds, no signs of life beneath the surface. On those days, hunger became a constant noise in his body. Not sharp at first, but persistent, like a background pain that never fully disappeared. He began eating anything he could catch. Fish, birds, sometimes raw, sometimes barely cleaned. Not because he wanted to, but because the ocean offered no alternatives. Rainwater remained his most valuable resource. Whenever clouds gathered, everything else stopped. He would prepare containers quickly, almost instinctively. Every drop mattered. Every drop meant survival. But storms were unpredictable. Some brought water. Others brought waves strong enough to nearly overturn the boat. More than once, he had to hold on tightly as the sea rose violently around him, threatening to erase everything in seconds. And yet somehow, the boat endured. Just barely. Time began to distort in his mind. At first, he tried counting days. But somewhere between the 5th and 7th month, he lost track. Numbers stopped making sense. Memory became unreliable. 6 months? 8? A year? It all blended together into one endless stretch of survival. His body changed as well. He became thinner, weaker. His skin darkened under constant sun exposure. His hair and beard grew long and unkempt. 438 days later, by the time José Salvador Alvarenga saw land again, he almost didn't recognize what he was looking at. It didn't come with warning. No dramatic storm. No sudden realization. Just a shape on the horizon, different from the endless line of blue he had stared at for more than a year. At first, he didn't trust it. The mind, after so long at sea, stops believing in change. He had seen mirages before. He had mistaken clouds for islands. He had learned not to hope too quickly. So he watched and waited. Slowly, the shape became clearer. It wasn't water. It wasn't imagination. It was land. Real land. The Marshall Islands. But even then, something inside him resisted belief. Because after 400+ days of nothing, reality itself felt uncertain. Still, the currents had done what survival alone could not. They had brought him back. As his small drifting boat approached the shore, he saw movement. People, human beings, standing on solid ground. The sight was overwhelming in a way words struggle to describe. After more than a year of silence, the world suddenly had voices again. Barely able to move properly, his body had changed beyond recognition from the man who left Mexico 438 days earlier. His hair was long and tangled, his beard untrimmed, his skin weathered by salt and sun. His eyes carried something deeper than exhaustion. They carried time itself. When he finally reached shore, he collapsed. Not from injury, not from impact, but from the sheer weight of survival finally ending. The people who found him were shocked, confused, even skeptical, because his story sounded impossible. A man drifting alone across the Pacific Ocean for more than a year, without proper food, without navigation, without rescue? It didn't make sense. But as word spread, investigations began. His route was analyzed. Ocean currents were studied. Weather patterns were checked. Experts confirmed that his journey, though extraordinary, was possible. The Pacific currents could indeed carry a drifting vessel from the coast of Mexico toward the Marshall Islands over a long period of time. What had seemed impossible was, in fact, real. News of the survival spread across the world. Journalists arrived. Doctors examined him. Scientists studied his condition. And the world reacted with disbelief, admiration, and confusion. How does a human survive 438 days at sea? The answer was not simple. There was no single miracle, no single trick, only endurance, adaptation, and the unwilling refusal of the human body to give up. But the story did not end with survival. Because survival and recovery are not the same thing. Even on land, Alvarenga struggled. Food felt unfamiliar at first. Sleep was inconsistent. His mind still carried echoes of the ocean. Psychological recovery would take far longer than physical healing. He had survived the sea, but now he had to survive the memory of it. Questions also followed him. Some people doubted parts of his story. Some questioned details of the timeline. Others tried to analyze every aspect of his journey. But no matter the debate, one fact remained uncontested. He had lived. Against distance. Against starvation. Against isolation. Against time itself. And somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a small fishing boat had carried a man farther than almost anyone in history had ever drifted alone. Not as a hero, not as a myth, but as a reminder of how fragile human life is, and how stubbornly it refuses to end. Where nothing should survive, one man did, and eventually, the world had no choice but to listen.